you all. It's a privilege to be here with you and have something to share with you. As you can see by the map we put up there, this is going to have to do with the Philippines. That's because after having done another 5 months of work there since I saw you last, there's been some developments and something that I would like to share with you. I've chosen to put it in a kind of a story form, which I will read and will enhance with some illustrations so that you can see the picture of a particular area where we're working evangelistically to introduce people to the gospel of the kingdom and the rest of the message of the Bible. This particular story is kind of dear on my heart because of being the result of many different portions of the work that I've worked with. And I would say that the most valuable to me thing that I've seen with this particular work is how the Filipinos that are in the church and have been working in the work for several years have jumped in and taken a great amount of responsibility for getting the work done. And that's an aspect of evangelism that you always hope for, is that you'll be able to inspire other people in such a way that they'll go ahead and work to inspire other people. So I hope you'll see that in this. Also, I would like you to keep those things in your mind, because this is what we're about. We have the most valuable message that the world ever heard, and we have it to share. And so it's our responsibility to share that to others in any way that we can, and maybe in some way each one of us will be inspired a little bit by this story. So David's going to help me by advancing the pictures, and I've written this out so that I can stay in order with the pictures. Otherwise I think we would wander considerably. It's entitled The Preaching of the Gospel in Palawan, beginning with my interest in Palawan. About 1997, when I started working with Evaristo Corpus, who had been preaching in Cagayan province for 20 years, he told me that shortly after marrying, he had resided in Palawan for a few years. This piqued my curiosity. It was a part of the Philippines I was not familiar with and began to think about the possibility of finding truth seekers there. In 2006, while traveling with Evaristo to preach in Bolas Point, Cagayan province, Elma Bonig was home for a vacation and joined our Bible studies in her parents' home. A young classmate of hers, named Rosalind, had followed Elma from the Bible school they were attending in Lawag, Ilocos Norte. She joined many of our Bible studies. The local pastor of the community church was a young single man named Jordan. During my visit, he became extremely interested, and the last night after the Bible study, Jordan and Rosalind continued to ask Bible questions until 4 a.m., when we needed to go to the river to load up in the boat for the 5-hour ride back to the nearest road. I was exhausted, but saw very good interest in these two, and I asked Rosalind where she was from, and to my surprise, she answered Palawan. I took note and planned to use her as a guide if she was willing. I never met Rosalind again. She resides in Lawag now and recently invited me to her home through contact with Elma, but still no trip to Palawan. In 2008, in Antique province, I met a young lady named Romelda Jean Piano. And Romelda was related to the youth that I had been teaching for several years, and it was easy to see that she was also quite interested to learn about the Bible. So I invited her to join us for a week of sharing in the mountains, which meant hiking from village to village, a distance of over 70 kilometers. At the end of the week, she had begun to grasp God's plan for the world and the significance of it. When I asked where her parents were, she told me she was raised in Palawan and had come to Antique to attend high school because there was no high school in the area where she lived there. She was staying with her grandparents at the time and introduced me to them. I asked her if her family in Palawan would be interested to listen to the Bible, and she told me she would ask them when she had the opportunity to do so. I was hoping for an invitation. In 2009, Romelda joined a few of our Bible studies, but after that she went to Manila to work, and we lost contact until Facebook began to spread across the Philippines. She found me and told me she had one daughter and was now separated from her husband. She was working in Manila to support her one-year-old daughter, Angel, who was being cared for by her grandparents. She had talked to her mother about the gospel message, and her mother agreed to host us if we went there. I began to look for a way to do so. This is Norberto Soberano in the picture. In 1997, after Sonia Bujo was baptized in Dado, Cotabato, Mindanao, she told us that her father was inviting us to share in his home in Zamboanga del Sur. The next year, I followed Sonia there to meet him, and 2 years later, he and several others in the area were baptized. The Soberano family lived nearby, and a teenage boy in the family started attending the meetings. After a few months, he was baptized, and one by one, his father, mother, brother, and sisters followed. Many of the baptized people did not continue in the faith, but the Soberano family did. The father was Norberto, Norbing for short. After Sonia's father, Iluminado Panes, if we can get the next picture, David. After Sonia's father, Iluminado Panes, died, Norberto tried his best to lead the small group for several years. He is a very intelligent person, but elderly and lacking in education in the Bible. It is much to his credit that the congregation survived and is growing now. Age forced him to leave the area in 2009. He now lives in Sorolla, South Cotabato, in the native place of his wife. In 2011, his eldest brother died, and the family gathered in the family home near Batad, Iloilo. Norbing was unable to attend, but phone numbers were shared. When Norbing obtained the numbers of his two sisters living in Palawan, he began to communicate with their children and immediately asked them if they would be willing to entertain our preaching in their homes. They answered yes, and Norbing asked me to go there to follow up. It took me a year to fit it into my schedule. I talked to Romelda and made plans for her to accompany us so that we could visit her family also. They lived in the same town as one of Norbing's sisters. This meant we had 3 invitations. While planning, one of the young ladies in the Antique church, next picture, Gina Lynn Kanha, told me she had a distant relative in Puerto Princesa, Palawan, that she had been talking Bible with via Facebook. I contacted Nilo Rodriguez and planned to meet him for a Bible study too. Romelda told me I would find a boat in Caticlan that made a trip for each night to Puerto Princesa, which is the capital of Palawan. Shane Davis was also in the Philippines, traveling with Bobong Calambro, a young preacher from Cotabato. They wanted to go to Palawan also, so I asked Norbing to meet us in Caticlan, Calibo. Romelda was unable to leave work and didn't join us. And when we arrived in Caticlan, we found out the boat had changed ports and we would have to travel 6 hours to Iloilo to catch it. In Iloilo, we learned the boat would take 3 days each way. We didn't have that much time in our schedule, so we went to a travel agent where we were told we could fly from Davao in Mindanao. So we rescheduled for a month later when we would be in Davao. 2013 was our first trip. About 3 weeks later, Norbing, Shane, Bobong, and I boarded for a 2-hour flight to Puerto, and finally I stood on Palawan. Palawan is a group of islands politically joined to Luzon, but geographically closer to Visayas. It is the western region of the Philippines, stretching from near Mindoro nearly to Malaysia. Next picture, please. It is the least populated region in the Philippines and is mostly undeveloped. Next picture. We went directly to Aborland to find Norbing's sister. He had been instructed to ride a van and get down in Magsaysay. There we asked a resident to help us to find Pepito Navarro, the son-in-law of Norbing's sister. He lived a tricycle ride away in the village of Aplaya. We were greeted with great excitement, and Norbing dived into Bible topics immediately. Soon a large group had gathered, and each new person that arrived was asking about our faith. Many of them were attending a Pentecostal group and called their pastor to join us. He invited us to their meeting in the evening and left. We felt that the response warranted another day, so we decided to stay. One of the men who came was Rolando Arbis, a nephew of Norbing, and he invited us to share in his house near the center of Magsaysay. The second afternoon we went there, and his daughter, who had a new baby, immediately asked plenty of questions and seemed seriously interested to know our doctrine. By the time we left, we all could see this was a place God wanted us to go. The next day we decided to leave Norbing there with his family and go on to Bubusawin to meet Romelda's parents. We found out from Pepito that although Bubusawin is included in the municipality of Aborland, it would take about 4 hours to arrive there after returning to Puerto. So Shane Bobong and myself left early in the morning and arrived in Puerto about 9 a.m. The ride to Bubusawin was only one per day, and it left sometime between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. We waited and finally boarded the traveling wreck of a bus about noon. After 3 breakdowns along the way, we reached Bubusawin at 6 p.m. and it was getting dark. We got instructions to the home of Rolly Piano and hiked about 1 kilometer, arriving well after dark. We met Emilda, Romelda's mother, and Angel, the daughter, as well as a brother and sister. They had already eaten and there was no food in the house. So we hiked about 2 kilometers along the beach to find someone who had a fish to sell and then back. We were starved and the fish still had to be cooked. Rolly came in very drunk and wanted to talk and talk. And about the time we started eating, he passed out. But after dinner, Emilda got out the Bible I had given her daughter Romelda in 2008 and started asking questions. The next 2 hours told me we would certainly have to do our best to go back in this place. We were asleep by 1 a.m. and up at 4 a.m. to catch the only ride back to Puerto, which passed Bubusawin about 5 a.m. We met Norbing and took a bus 5 hours north to Bato Taytay, and within a few minutes of arriving, we were in the house of Norberto's oldest sister, and a group had gathered. Again, Norbing went right to the point. He was overtired and already losing his voice, but he knew this would probably be his only chance to get the truth to his family in Palawan. Soon the family planned a meeting at the largest house in the settlement, and we went there to eat. About 20 adults came to listen. I taught in Ilonggo dialect, as usual, and I asked a 14-year-old to do the reading. One man sitting on the floor in the far corner at the start of the meeting kept inching closer and closer. At the end of the meeting, he was right at my feet. It seemed that this must be the reason that we were sent to Palawan, for there was a great amount of interest among them. The next morning, some of Norbing's nephews and nieces followed us to the highway, where we waited 2 hours to catch a bus. That time was full of Bible questions, and we received an overwhelming invitation to come back. 5 hours on the bus brought us back to Puerto Princesa, where we found a lodging house and contacted Nilo. Next picture. After dinner, he came with 2 young ladies who were his fellow students at college. All 3 of them were carrying English Bibles, and when I asked them about their religions, they all said that they preferred to self-study and did not attend any churches. 2 hours later, they left after telling us to return as soon as possible. We had 4 contacts, and all of them were positive. And the next morning, we returned to Davao. And before I go on to the next part, I want to share with you that I've been blessed with the ability to learn languages, and since traveling for 20 years, in the area of Mindanao and Visayas, I've gotten proficient with the language Ilonggo, which I want to share a little bit with you. This song was composed by one of our preachers who was hiking with us in the mountain, and it is about the hike that we did. I'll sing it in Ilonggo first, and then I'll sing a translation that I did so that you can understand it. It's like this. Sa Kristihanun kinabuhi, Diyos kanaton, sa Kristihanun kinabuhi, waay kanaton, nagpili, Diyos kanaton, nagtudlo, sa pagsunu mandu niya, ayaw gayudug duha-duha, sa pagsunod sa mandu niya, lakaw kamoog pamamunga, kag si Kristu iwalita. Saka-saka sa kabukiran, subay-subay sa kasapaan, pasanglukdu sa iyang karga, kag si Kristu iwalita. Kag kon natapos na ang panaw, kita baya pagagantihan, sa kahago binuhatan ning kalibutan. In the English, in this Christian life we live, we didn't choose what God will give, but God has taught us to follow His commandments through. With double mind you won't succeed, His commandments you won't heed. So go forth and serve the Lord, bearing fruit by preaching His word. With every mountain you climb high, and every stream that you pass by, with every heavy load you bring, the gospel message you can sing. And when we finish this hike so hard, He will give us a big reward for the work which we have done beneath the sun. I thought it was a remarkable composition and committed it to memory. Moving on, next to our second trip. Next slide. In 2014, Shane and I planned to go to Palawan at different times so that they would have 2 opportunities to listen. Shane was unable, however, to make a trip to the Philippines, and Norbing was not in good health also. I decided to stay for a week and make the same circuit. I asked Bobong to help me too. 2 young ladies, Abigail Asul from Samar and Linlin Chiadoro from Antique, were with me for most of the 5-month trip, very dedicated to the work, and they continued with us also to Palawan. We flew from Iloilo and went directly to a playa and the Navarro home. We were entertained well and realized that Pepito's married daughter, who was a school teacher, was very interested. But there was less enthusiasm among the others. About 6 to 8 gathered in the evening for the Bible study. The next day we moved to the Arbis home in Magsaysay, where everyone dropped everything they were doing and the Bible study commenced immediately. We stayed 2 nights, and Rolando even came home for a 2-hour lunch break from work to squeeze in an extra Bible study. His wife and 2 daughters joined every session too. His 3rd daughter, still in high school, joined in the evenings. By the time we left, I knew Rolando was considering baptism. This time we rode a broken-down Jeep to Bubusawin and had a 2-hour delay to replace a front wheel bearing, but we reached the village before dark. Rolly Piano met us with open arms and was sober. After eating, we began to answer his Bible questions, and when he ran out of questions, Emilda started. The next day, we had more studies with Emilda, and at 4 p.m., Rolly came to tell us to go to a friend's house where they would prepare our dinner, and a group was gathering to listen to our teaching. Actually, Rolly had planned the entire event, caught special fish and barbecued it for the group. There were 2 hours of Bible study, and we realized that the Debria family was also very willing to have our teaching. The next morning, we were in the Jeep by 5:30 and caught a bus to Bato Taytay by 11 a.m. When we arrived, we discovered that Norbing's sister had passed away, as well as her son that had been so interested the year before. The 14-year-old girl that had translated for us was at boarding school, and the home of Norbing's nephew Arlen was in very poor repair. We stayed 2 days and shared with several people. The second night there were about 10 listeners, but we felt the interest was far greater in Bubusawan and Magsaysay, and I decided to prioritize those places in my next trip. Nilo came to the lodge again to study. He brought 2 different young ladies this time. The result was also good, and we have maintained contact through Facebook with Nilo and one of the ladies. We could see that Nilo was beginning to agree about the inheritance of the earth and the unity of God. He told us that next visit he would like to guide us to Araceli Island to share with his family. That hasn't happened yet because he took a job on another island, but he has stayed in communication with the church. Again, we felt God was with us, guiding us to the people who were waiting to hear. Norbing had done the right things, and now I could see we would soon have believers in Palawan. I pondered my life. Next picture, please. Next picture, please. I pondered my life. In 1995, with newly baptized Elizabeth Madurable, I had ventured to La Fortuna, Agusan del Sur. Now, 20 years later, the church has started to develop and evangelize on its own. Also in 1995, I went to Antique, and now 20 years have passed, and both groups are growing, and I believe will continue to grow even if I don't return. The faith is instilled in the hearts of the people. I'm 60 years old now, and if it suits God's plans, I will probably be 80 when the church in Palawan bears fruit too. But I'm willing. To the story of 2015 and our third trip. Next slide, please. Shane was unable to fit Palawan into his busy schedule, so I returned for another week. Sister Elizabeth was feeling healthier after several years of suffering from a mild stroke and high blood pressure, and she wanted to see the people in Palawan. Norbing would not be able to return. Abigail and Linlin were with me again, and so I decided it would be the 4 of us. We met Elizabeth in Iloilo, then took the flight to Puerto and went directly to Magsaysay to the Arbis home. Again, Rolando dropped everything, and we had 2 days of continuous study. One daughter was working in Manila. The other 2 joined as much as they could. We felt that their interest was so high we should return here instead of going to Bato. On the 3rd day, we went to Bubusawan. A new bus made the trip quite pleasant, and we arrived at 3 p.m. Again, Romelda was not able to leave her job and join us. We were meeting her in Manila each year to have Bible studies in her boarding house. Imelda was not asking questions anymore because she understood. Now she was intent on sharing with others. Rolly arranged for us to have 3 nights of study in their home and sent us to Long Point, about an hour's hike away, to share with another Dubria family that had recently arrived from Antique. These were close relatives of Elizabeth, and she was very excited to see their willingness to learn. Next picture, Abigail taught the children Bible stories while we were there. We stayed 3 days, and the 3rd night, next picture, we went to the Dubria home where we had taught in the previous year. They had gone to a village at the southern tip of Palawan to attend the burial of a relative and just returned. Elizabeth started asking where the Dubria, Francisco, and Conha families had settled in Palawan. Her cousin offered to build her a house for her on his vacant lot if she would return to teach them about the Bible. That's how interested he was. He said, "I'll just give you a lot. Come and stay here." He also offered to guide us to the remote area where he grew up at the southern tip of the island. She was excited and started to plan to return in a few months. Linlin, whose mother is a Francisco, also agreed to go with her. We decided that it should be 3 of them, with the 3rd being a preacher from the Antique church, probably Mauricio Conha. When we left Bubusawan, we could see great opportunity for the truth to continue to grow in the hearts of the people. We traveled back to Magsaysay and went directly to a playa. Papito and his wife were struggling with sickness and family problems among their married children. This made them more serious than before, and the Bible studies were emotional. By the time we left, we realized that they had bonded with us and expected our visits as often as we could manage it. The next day, we returned to the home of Rolando Arbis, and he asked for details about the Church of God and baptism. He heard our story about Bubu Sawin and the two Debria families, and told Elizabeth that many of her relatives lived in a village about an hour away called Sitio Balderrama. It is named after the town they came from in Antique, which is the town where most of our church members live there. He said we should go there and look up the Francisco family. He was too busy to guide us, so we returned to a playa and asked Pepito. He quickly agreed, and an hour later we knocked on a door that had written on it with chalk, Francisco family. Because so much of our church is Francisco family, even the one who composed that song was Potin Francisco. The idea of going to a new place and it being Francisco family was certainly exciting to all of us. When the door opened, the woman looked like a twin of our preacher in Antique, Mauricio Conha. She was actually a second cousin. We began to explain our purpose and soon discovered that the village has 180 homes. Everybody there is from Balderrama Antique. There are only a half dozen family names, and no church has ever sent missionaries into the area. The people are starved to hear the Word of God. We started helping them. Many cannot read or write. We could only stay for a few hours, and they fed us too. Abigail and Lynn cooked and washed the dishes. Next picture. That's Lynn sharing with her cousin, her second cousin, whom she would have never met had we not gone there. And the girl just opened up and started asking questions and wanting to learn as fast as she could. Next picture. That's Abigail and Lynn washing the dishes. And I put that picture in there because one thing that I've learned in my life is how hospitality works. We as visitors did all the housework, the dishes and everything, so that the Bible study was continuous. This has a tremendous impact on the people that we're sharing with. Many pictures were taken. When we left, all four of us were crying and praising the Almighty Jehovah, who knows His own and sent His messengers to preach glad tidings to them. Now it was sure that Elizabeth would return. And I want to share a little bit about the Karaya tribe. The next slide. When we arrived in Antique, we shared the news with the brethren, and there was great joy and thanksgiving. The Francisco de Bria and Conha clan of the Karaya tribe had suffered from overpopulation in the small Valderrama Valley in the middle of the 20th century. Some had starved to death. That's why in the 1970s, many of them went to Mindanao. Elizabeth's father settled in the rugged hills of Alaosan and named the place Kawilihan, which means delightful place. Kawilihan is found in the Ilongo Bible in Psalm 1 and 2. And his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. The word delight. When the area was populated, the Karaya tribe began to settle in the Libungan River Valley nearby. First in Pacao, Alamada, where we have been teaching since 1997 and just had our first baptism, Junie Francisco. Then in Dado, where baptism started with the Clarito family in 1996, and by 2000 a concrete chapel was constructed, and the church has continued to grow until now. Because of war with the Muslim tribes over land, many of these people fled the area in 1986, and some settled in Lake Cebu, South Cotabato, where we have one baptized member now. Others settled in La Fortuna, Veruela, Agusan del Sur. Next picture. That's the picture in Pacao of the people had called us back after 5 years that we didn't return. They called us back and gathered for an all-day session. Next picture. That's a picture of Elizabeth, Sister Elizabeth Moderable, and her commitment to the work and her participation is not measurable. Next picture. Just hold there for a minute. Others settled in La Fortuna, Veruela, Agusan del Sur, where we began to preach in 1995 with Elizabeth as our guide, and today there is a flourishing church. Go back a few pictures, because I want to pick up the picture of the La Fortuna church. No? It must be down. Sorry. One more. One more. Huh. Isn't in there. Okay. Back to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was our first contact in the Karaya tribe. She has worked as evangelist and minister, sharing the truth to as many of her tribe's people as she can find. She is devoted to the Lord's work and has chosen the advantage of reaching out with the word over having a husband, family, and home. They call her Cousin Beth. And this is an amazing story in itself. Arlen and I met her in 1991. In 1994, we were able to spend more time with her. And in 1995, she was baptized and immediately set out helping me to locate and preach to every one of her tribe members that we could find. And the story of the Karaya tribe is just a huge story. They were only civilized after World War II. They were a remote mountain region. And the government forced them into civilization after the war. Then because of starvation, because of overpopulation, they were scattered. And the ones that were still in Antique were starving, and the Baptist church went in there and brought food. And they would send a truckload of food, truckload of rice, every week or two during the 2 months or 3 month season that there was no food there. And this truck would go around and drop off rice for every village of this tribe. And when the people converted to our faith, they lost their supply of food for those months, willingly. And now, because of continuing to preach in the area, we've even converted those local Baptist preachers who were converting them to Baptist. And they also chose to give up the food. Next slide. At the same time, several families migrated to a mountainous region in Negros and began to clear jungle and plant rice. Within 5 years, they surrendered because the soil was too poor to support them, and many returned to Antique to face starvation. A few of them went to Palawan. They discovered an unused area near the mountain in Magsaysay, Borland, and dug irrigation canals and leveled the diluvian plain into rice paddies. By 2000, many others had joined them. They were baptized Catholic back in Antique, but brought no religion with them to Palawan. Only trusted God to help them survive, and they named the place Valderrama. And I'll go now to the fourth trip. Next slide. When I returned to the United States in April of 2015, I could not stop talking about the Palawan story. At a meeting of the Church of God in Kashmir, I asked the group of believers to support the fourth trip to Palawan with $1,500 for expenses. Elizabeth had sent a letter outlining her plans, and after hearing the story, it was readily approved. I told Elizabeth and Lin to make their plans and prepare. So Elizabeth, Lin, and Mauricio Conha landed in Puerto on August 19 and proceeded to Magsaysay. They reported daily by Facebook. They had Bible studies in the Arbis home and reported that Rolando is planning to be baptized at our next visit. They spent 4 days in Bubusawin and saw increased interest in each home. They reported that Imelda Piano wishes to have her baptism at our next visit also. They had Bible studies at the Navarro home in Aplaya. They went to Valderrama 3 different times and had studies with the several families. The last night in Valderrama, a group of about 10 adults requested a follow-up visit in November. Elizabeth agreed if she can find a budget. They are expecting our return in January and requested a seminar in the month of April 2016 so that those who are in school can attend also. Our conclusion, and please go to the next slide. Natural evangelism works. When believers are devoted to loving others, they find opportunity to share their faith to friends, relatives, and acquaintances. When we read the Bible stories, both Old and New Testament, we see the foreknowledge and power of God at work. And we that are of faith must believe that the foreknowledge and power of God is still at work today. And I'll read 1 Peter 4, 9 through 11. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. As every man has received the gift, even so minister the same one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, let him do it as of the ability which God giveth, that God in all things may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom be praise and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Also 1 Corinthians 13 from verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Elijah sought God in the wind, fire, and an earthquake. Next picture. He heard God speak in a still small voice. Shortcut versions of the gospel message, promises of temporal blessings, loud preaching and debates, even TV broadcasts, may produce large groups of followers for a time. But love for your neighbor is the method that God commanded, Jesus used, and the apostles wrote about. It's biblical evangelism, and it's natural to humans. Thank you.